a political organization, and our mission is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We invite you to check out our website at lwvbc.org and to follow us on Facebook. We're live streaming tonight and hope to have a YouTube recording available soon. It'll probably be available on our website. Tonight's topic is dark money in politics, and our speaker is Lisa Graves. She's the executive director of the Center of Media and Democracy. And we heard her on Saturday, some of us did, and her research is very eye-opening. She had previously served in the Department of Justice as Deputy Assistant Attorney General, so pretty high up. I heard some stories at lunchtime about that, but we won't hear about that tonight. The League certainly has positions on money in politics, and I put some handouts on the table that show that. We also have some handouts that show how we can do different reforms to try and help the influence money in politics, and particularly related to Lisa's speaking today would be on disclosure and transparency. Last year in the legislature, there were about 5 bills that were introduced to close some loopholes on disclosure, and they were all killed in committee. So they're going to come back next year, and we all need to be raising our voices and trying to get this kind of thing through. So I guess with that, we'll welcome Lisa Graves.
So I wanted to, that's me, how'd that happen? I wanted to start by thanking you for inviting me. Thank you so much for the invitation to come here. I'm a native Coloradoan, but I live in Wisconsin, so don't hold that against me. But I've been excited to be invited to come to support the League of Women Voters. They do such vitally important work in our democracy to help make sure people are more informed about issues, particularly issues of democracy, about people's voting rights, the right to vote, about how our democracy works or isn't working, how we need more disclosure to protect against corruption. I'm so proud of the League nationally. In Wisconsin, we've helped support and defend the League, as it has been, thank you. Beautiful. As it has been assailed sometimes for the act of actually registering voters on a nonpartisan basis. And I'm honored to be here tonight to support the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. So thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it. My organization is the Center for Media and Democracy, and we were founded in about 1993 by an activist who was concerned about the influence of Monsanto on media and democracy. And so that's where we got our start, and I became the leader of the Center for Media and Democracy about 8 years ago, and this is our newest site, Exposed by CMD. We have a bunch of sites. You may have heard of them. PR Watch is one of our flagship sites. Source Watch, which some of you may have first heard of as Disinfopedia, which was documenting disinformation in our society. Alec Exposed is another site of ours, and we've created this site to be a landing place so you can get to all of our material versus trying to find us all over the web. We've won some awards. I'll move on. Our focus is really on how corporations and CEOs have been really distorting our democracy and our media. And tonight I was asked to speak about dark money, but also about sort of gray money. Dark money is called dark money because about 4 decades ago there was a concerted effort in the U.S., both nationally and a number of states, to really revamp the election laws in this country to try to have public disclosure of who's donating money to candidates, put limits on how much any person can give. Already before then, way back to Teddy Roosevelt, there was a long-standing bar on corporations giving to candidates, in part because there was so much corruption during the robber baron era that the politicians were being shaken down, the corporations were being shaken down by the politicians, and they actually supported that ban, other than some of the real big ones like Standard Oil. But a lot of the other corporations that didn't have the money of Standard Oil were very excited to have a bar on corporate giving, because otherwise every time they went to see a politician, the politician would basically check to see whether they've donated. So more than 100 years we've had a bar in, nationally and in most states on direct corporate contributions to candidates. And also when you think about it, corporations, their treasury, meaning their wealth, is so much vaster than any citizen, that if you would allow corporations to use their almost unlimited wealth, they would clearly drown out the voices of ordinary Americans. So about 40 years ago, there was a new regime put in place to not have dark money, basically. To have it so that you could look up who donated to someone that was running for office and find out who might influence them. And there were caps put in place so that, as I said, so that one person couldn't have undue influence on that politician. But since that time, there's been a lot of efforts to get around those rules. Let me flash forward here. And the Kochs have been part of that equation. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Koch brothers. Have you heard of the Koch brothers? Aha. So the Kochs, we actually started writing about the Kochs when I got involved in the Center for New Democracy in 2009, 2010, and then Jane Mayer wrote that tremendous piece in the New Yorker, really dragging them into the sunlight, and then she followed up that with her book, Dark Money, which I would urge you all to read if you have not had a chance to read it yet. But the Kochs and others were very active in the 1970s, way before the internet, right? In ways that a lot of us just couldn't see. If it wasn't recorded in the paper, it just was not visible. And so I wanted to ground this conversation in a little bit of that history, and also talk a bit about sort of how we got to this point where we've got this dark money and this very gray money. And that really is traced back to Justice Powell. I'm sure some of you have heard of Justice Powell. He was, Lewis Powell was on the Supreme Court. He was put on the Supreme Court by Richard Nixon after a couple other failed nominations that he put forward before he was impeached. And Lewis Powell, before he became a Supreme Court justice, had been a lawyer who was asked by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to help businesses out, because businesses, meaning the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, meaning some of the biggest businesses in the country, felt like they were not having their way with Nixon. They were very upset that Congress was passing rules finally to require rules for clean air, or cleaner air, and clean water. I know as a native Colorado and how important those rules are for basic health and asthma and all sorts of other concerns. But back in the early 1970s, the Chamber of Commerce was very upset that Nixon would dare to sign into law these measures. And that was, of course, in the aftermath of tremendous awakening on the part of the American people to environmental devastation, not just the rivers burning in Ohio and Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, but so many other things that we were witnessing in our own nation, that people wanted to have a voice and wanted to have our government protect us from these poisons. So Powell wrote a memo basically saying, and it may be shocking to hear this, but he actually said in this memo that it was crucial for businesses to get more involved in politics and democracy in our country, to create their own think tanks, to outweigh the universities that were independent academic institutions, to create their own bodies in the states and the federal government, to influence government in every way possible. And he said, this is the shocking thing he said, that no person in the entire United States has less influence on government, circa 1972-73, no person has less influence on government than the American businessman. And he was determined to set out a blueprint to change that. And they have, right? So that blueprint, people don't realize this, that blueprint was circulated far and wide among some of the richest millionaires then, now billionaires today, in America as a game plan for how to move forward, how to retake the democracy so it serves their interests. And it might surprise you, or perhaps not, to know that Charles Koch's response to that memo was it didn't go far enough. Didn't go far enough. That's because going back to the early 1960s, Charles Koch had become involved in what was really, what was called by the participants to be a thing called the Freedom School, which described itself as an anarcho-capitalist school for reaching out to Americans in the country to try to limit government, limit the power of government to regulate corporations, limit the power of government at every level. And Charles Koch was sort of schooled in that school and began investing in resurrecting a discredited school of economics to try to push that into prominence today. And so he had very radical, reactionary, I would say, ideas about our economy, about our government, about our democracy. And when he saw Lewis Powell's memo, he said, great, but we need to do more. And he did more. One of the things he did was really invest heavily in the 1970s in a network of what was then sort of the basic libertarian party in the United States. His investment was so deep that in 1980, the libertarians in the United States called him the Coctopus. It wasn't a concoction of Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi to call that the Coctopus. He was spending so much money and exerting so much control and micromanaging the operations to get what he wanted that they called him the Coctopus. So he urged his brother, David, on the right over here, to run for vice president, and they funded that campaign. David funded it out of the wealth of his personal wealth from the Coke companies, from Coke industry, and that campaign is very telling. It said that they wanted to privatize Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schools, prisons, kill a bunch of agencies, including, of course, the EPA, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, and more. They basically articulated a view that the primary role of government is to protect property, their property, really, the property of the most. That was the real core role that they saw for government. And I'm happy to report, as you all know, that David Koch lost the chance to be vice president to the right of Ronald Reagan. He only got about 1% of the vote. But that was a key moment in the architecture of the sort of revolution to come for the Kochs. Because at that point, they decided they weren't going to invest in a third party anymore. They were going to be investing in institutions to basically remake the Republican Party into an operation that would do their will. So they created a group like Citizens for a Sound Economy that operated in DC and pushed for that privatization agenda. That privatization agenda came out with a report in 1987 calling for the privatization of all these fields, including the post office, including Amtrak, including prisons, of course. And they successfully got Conrail, the corporate railroad, privatized, and more. So they became players within the Republican Party way before many of us realized it. And they were also actively fighting fines for polluting. So they were trying to move forward with an idea that Charles Koch had, which was that he wanted to change the entire culture of politics to have his ideas be dominant, and then he could re-enter more aggressively the political realm once he planted all these seeds. And so what in essence we're experiencing now is the harvest, in a way, of Charles Koch and David Koch and their contemporaries, the billionaires who they have bonded with and are allied with. There are other billionaires and millionaires then before who were active in this movement. Phil Anschutz, one of them, his family, the Coors family, Pete Coors and his predecessors were active in that. Other billionaires and millionaires from other states. But they together have been funding a lot of these operations to really change our democracy in substantial ways. But the Kochs have been, in some ways, the most disciplined investors in this operation. And they certainly were involved in electoral politics going back to 1976. Charles was most definitely. But they began really re-engaging in a deep way in dark money in the 1996 presidential race. They actually created a thing and funded a thing called Triad, which actually ended up in a congressional investigation. But Fred Thompson, the former Law and Order actor, was at the helm of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he made sure not a single subpoena went to his buddies, the Kochs. And so there was a limited investigation that the Democratic staff pursued on a bipartisan basis, and the outcome of that investigation, along with other investigations, was that we had a crisis circa 1996 in our country where there was so much money escaping reporting. People were creating groups like Triad to spend money late in races to try to change the results without characterizing themselves as a PAC, running them as so-called issue campaigns, but focusing on people, the candidates. So out of that 1997 investigation came the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, BICRA, which is more popularly known as the McCain-Feingold Law. And McCain-Feingold tried to put a cabin on some of that dark money. It said, we're not going to assume you're just some ordinary nonprofit that's spending on issues if you're spending in the 60 days before the election. We have a right to assume that if you're spending heavily right before the election, that that's election spending. And you should have to disclose who's giving that money and how you're spending it. So the Kochs and Betsy DeVos and others sought to stamp out McCain-Feingold and sought to make sure that there were justices on the Supreme Court willing to do their bidding. So going back to Lewis Powell, one of his most infamous decisions is the 1976 decision of Buckley versus Vallejo, which began to articulate this concept of money as speech. So the reason that's important is because under our First Amendment doctrine, if something is a fundamental right, like the freedom of speech, then you have to have a compelling state interest, a compelling governmental interest to restrict it. And so that puts greater scrutiny on any regulation that restricts it. And so when I speak, in fact, I would submit to you that in the recent era, there's far more restrictions on actual human speech than there is on money as speech. But you can see that context for not having government punish people for just merely speaking on the corner or talking to their friends about issues. But what Lewis Powell did, because he's the former lawyer advising the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, he wanted to embed into law a doctrine of commercial speech and the doctrine of a base for attacking campaign finance laws, which is how we got into this dark money disaster that we're in. Now I have to pause for a second and tell you a little bit more about Lewis Powell, because most people just go, oh, he's some Nixon Supreme Court justice. That's not who Lewis Powell really was. Lewis Powell was a tobacco lawyer. He was a Richmond, Virginia lawyer who spent decades before he wrote that memo defending the worst industry in our country in terms of the death and destruction of Americans, the tobacco industry. It was Lewis Powell who fought common sense regulation of tobacco, who fought warnings on tobacco, warning labels on tobacco and cigarettes, and who was part of the whole team with the tobacco industry in trying to convince Americans that smoking was great for you. Hiring doctors as experts for hire, you saw them on TV telling you that smoking was fine, it would relax you. That's who Lewis Powell was. He was an immoral man, pardon me, on an immoral mission, and he was rewarded for that with a Supreme Court seat. His decision, Buckley versus Vallejo, was then expanded upon after I left the Senate Judiciary Committee, where I had been the chief counsel for nominations, and I tried my best to keep John Roberts off of the DC Circuit Court. I failed you. I was not successful, but in my defense, the Republicans controlled Congress, and they were determined to get John Roberts on that DC Circuit so that they could elevate him to the Supreme Court. I prepared for the Supreme Court fight if Bush were to win in 2004, but my concern was that if he won and he appointed a white man, it would definitely be John Roberts. And I was sad to be proven correct. So he was not confirmed on my watch, but he was in fact confirmed by the Senate. And shortly thereafter, in 2010, he helped orchestrate the decision of Citizens United, which many of you have heard about. So Citizens United struck down not just key portions of the McCain-Feingold law, the BICRA, that came out of, in part, the investigation of the Koch brothers' trial balloon in dark money. But what they said was that Congress couldn't regulate in this area other than disclosure. And Congress has been impotent in even regulating disclosure. As many of you know, the Disclose Act was introduced in Congress and didn't go anywhere due to the number of politicians, I'm sorry to say, on the right side of the aisle, meaning the Republican side of the aisle, who would not even stand in favor of basic disclosure rules. So that's my preliminary comments about the Kochs. We have more to talk about. I'm going to depress you more, I know I am. But it's important for you to know this so you can share it with your friends and we can stand together and fight back and speak out. So that's my little tour on this history in the Koch brothers. So thank you for indulging me. So a lot of what we do is trace this Koch cash. Where does money go? It goes to groups that are both these dark money groups that are active in elections, that have names that you pop up on an ad, but you can't really tell who's behind it. It's always something like Americans for this or Citizens for that, but it's really the Koch brothers and their billionaire buddies for the most part. And then we also trace their influence in other groups. And so what I'm going to talk with you about today are three sort of components of the gray money. Now that I've talked about the dark money, for the most part, the gray money is largely through nonprofit organizations, nonprofit entities organized under the 501c3 or C4 laws, parts of the IRS code, that are charities, meaning for the 501c3s, you can donate and get a tax deduction for donating, and they don't pay any taxes. For the 501c4s, you don't get a deduction, but they don't pay any taxes. And those groups are groups that don't disclose to the public unless they want to, their donors. So what the Kochs have done before Citizens United and then in a massive sense since Citizens United is use the C4 groups to really be vehicles for political campaigning in which they don't say vote for or against a person, but they talk about that candidate or their opponent most usually, and they say bad things about them and say you should be concerned with this issue with this person, and it's designed obviously to tilt the election. And they spend heavily in that, so much so that in the 2016 election, back in 2015, they announced that they were going to spend nearly $800 million in that election. They spent a little bit less, but they still spent several $100 million, even though they didn't directly back Trump. They spent a lot of money in Senate races across the country, as you know, and in a lot of other races at the state level and city and county level. And so I want to talk about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. That video I wrote the script for, and Mark Fiore, the Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist, did the cartoon for, and we did it with Alliance for a Better Utah. And I'm really proud of that because it sort of, in a nice, funny way, I hope, but sad, but funny way, captures some of these issues. We'll talk about ALEC, talk about the State Policy Network, which is these think tanks in the states that also work in conjunction with ALEC on their legislative agenda. And then talk a bit about the Bradley Foundation, which is a Wisconsin-based national foundation that's heavily focused on Colorado. So, in 2011, I got a call from a whistleblower who had a bunch of bills that were from the American Legislative Exchange Council. And no one wanted to publish them because it was in the middle of the WikiLeaks crackdown back in 2011. And I looked at the bills. I was sort of in shock because of the depth and breadth and duration of the agenda I was seeing. So many of the worst bills I'd ever heard of in the states, they were ALEC bills. It was really a shock, including the bills to make it harder for Americans to vote. The strict voter ID bills. So I said, I looked around, I studied the bills, and then I realized that they were all published in the state houses in every state house in the country, just without the ALEC label. So I said I would publish them. Again, in essence, because they were already out there, you just didn't know that they were ALEC bills, and I wanted to make sure people knew that. In the Trove of Whistleblower Documents was a document that was called the ALEC 101, and it was their PR document for the corporations they were recruiting to join ALEC. And it had this flow chart, and in the middle of the flow chart it said, the private sector, meaning the corporations, and the public sector, meaning the legislators, get a, quote, equal voice and vote. And I said, what? Really? Vote. You know, I'd been in Washington, I'd been on the Hill, I'd been at the Justice Department, I had lobbied for the ACLU to protect civil liberties in the middle of the Patriot Act reauthorization fight. I never once voted as an equal with Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid, and I can only imagine if there were some revelation that the Democrats were voting as equals with Greenpeace and Sierra Club and Planned Parenthood, that there would be investigations until the cows came home, and probably tiki torches, I'll say nowadays. Because it would be wrong. It's wrong for legislators to give an equal vote secretly behind closed doors without the press or public present on bills before they're introduced to the State House. That basically transmutes these lawmakers into super lobbyists, super undisclosed lobbyists for these special interests. So we launched Alec Exposed. There's a whole site called alecexposed.org, which you can go to. And basically what Alec does is it takes money from corporations, they write the bills, then they go to fancy meetings, as the video says, and they vote on the bills. The press is not allowed to come in, the public is not allowed to come in, and sometimes they amend the bills, and sometimes we've had legislators go and tell us that sometimes legislators want to amend the bill, and the amendment is voted down by the corporations. At one ALEC meeting, one of the Texas legislators was talking to the new legislators and telling him, this is how it works. We're the football players, and then he gestured to the corporate lobbyists and special interest groups, and they're the coach. And our job is to get that ball down the field and across the finish line. That's how they perceive this operation. And the corporations get a tax write-off for doing so, for giving money to ALEC. And so we joined in Common Cause's filing. We talked with them before we launched Alec Exposed about them filing an IRS complaint. They filed the first complaint, and then we submitted joint evidence 3 times to try to get the IRS to do something about Alec, because a charity is supposed to operate for the public interest, not for private interest. Specifically by statute, by law, in the express language, it is not supposed to act for the private benefit of anybody. This is the essence of acting for the private benefit of the corporations that are members, and only those corporations, really. I created Alec Exposed with my team, and this was our summary. Global corporations are scheming to rewrite your rights and boost their revenue. Most of the bills are really about that at the end of the day, but there's more, including making it harder for Americans to vote and making it easier to get away with murder. We created this site. You can go to our site anytime to look up who funds Alec, who the corporations are, who the politicians are, more and more and more. We have a whole set of resources we've created for you. I helped write this report about the money flow in terms of these scholarships. The lawmakers get paid to go to these trips. They often don't tell you that they went. The corporations usually have a state night, not a stake night, but there's stake usually. The state night, the corporations bring together the politicians from that state, your state. They go to one of the best restaurants in town. They have unlimited booze, unlimited steak, whatever. Then the corporations all put their credit cards down and divide the bill. And it doesn't count for many that don't disclose in most states that that's lobbying, that those are benefits. But it's not just that. At Alec meetings, they have this thing called Kids Congress, so that the children of the lawmakers and the lobbyists can hang out together while their parents are schmoozed and boozed. So this is sort of a little bit of a way in which Alec works. It's meetings and then a model. They call them model bills. I don't call them model anything, but they call them model bills. It goes to state legislature and then they push it forward. And so Bill Moyers, when we launched Alec Exposed, was very interested in this development because a lot of people had written a bit about Alec over time. There have been a number of news stories before the internet was ubiquitous, before Google and after, but none of it had really taken hold, in part because no one could prove what Alec did. They didn't have the bills. So now we suddenly have the bills. So Bill Moyers narrated this film that you might have seen on PBS, and if you would like a copy, if you'd like to show it at your home or at a meeting, I can get you a copy of United States of Alec. And he was very interested before our Alec work became famous. Our Alec work became famous because shortly after Trayvon Martin was murdered and shot in Florida that night in February of 2012, shortly after that news broke, and they said that George Zimmerman was not going to be arrested for killing Trayvon Martin, we knew that that was an Alec bill. It's called the Castle Doctrine. It was more popularly known as the Stand Your Ground Law. And what it did was change the self-defense rules in any jurisdiction that adopts it from just a right of self-defense in your home, where if someone comes into your home, you've been intruding in your home, you don't have a duty to retreat because you're in your home. Where could you retreat to? You have a right of self-defense that includes deadly self-defense in most jurisdictions. What Stand Your Ground did was change the rules so if you're on a street, you don't have a duty to retreat. And so the jury instructions actually that were read in George Zimmerman's trial specifically instructed that jury that George Zimmerman had a right to stand his ground, but not that Trayvon Martin had a right to stand his ground. It was a year later. So we helped break that story, and then a lot of the press became very interested in our Alec work. And other folks became interested, including Ava DuVernay, who just last week won 4 Emmys for her incredible documentary, which I would recommend to you, called The 13th. She featured our work in that film, our work on the story of the National Rifle Association's role in those measures, but also our work on helping to expand the expose of the private prison industry that had been largely funding Alec for decades. One of the things I discovered when I helped to break the story of the role of Alec in Stand Your Ground was that after the 2004 election, the NRA was searching for a boogeyman. Now, I grew up shooting. I grew up in Colorado. I could shoot a pop can, from over there with really deadly accuracy for that can. So I'm not someone who's never held a gun, but I believe in responsible gun ownership, and I believe that we have to have reasonable regulations like most Americans do. But what happened was the NRA was really, they couldn't say that Congress was going to take away your guns. They couldn't say the president was going to take away your guns. They had George Bush, and so they were looking for another way to move this forward, and so they concocted the Castle Doctrine, Stand Your Ground in Florida, and they pushed that into law in Florida. The bill was introduced by 2 Alec members. After Jeb Bush signed it into law in 2005. They took it to a secret closed-door meeting in Texas. Walmart co-chaired that task force. It was called the Crime and Elections, Public Safety and Elections Task Force. Walmart is the largest seller of long guns in the world and the biggest retailer of bullets in the world. And Walmart and other corporations that were there voted in favor of making Stand Your Ground a model bill to push into law across the country. That same task force, the Public Safety and Elections Task Force, in 2009, after Obama won the White House, got together in a meeting that was no longer co-chaired by Walmart, but was co-chaired by the National Rifle Association, and passed as a national model the effort to make it harder for Americans to vote. The voter ID restrictions that make it hard for college students, for example, to vote, even though they're residents, unquestionably residents of where they're going to school. So, Ava's film goes into that, and I'm so glad that they won. We did not win the Oscar this year. We were nominated, but she's an amazing filmmaker. I hope you'll check out the 13th. So that's not all Alec does. Alec has been a longtime fan of Milton Friedman. You probably heard of him. He won a Pulitzer, or won a Nobel Prize for economics. Which sort of makes me question the Nobel Prize process. But Alec has treated, before he passed away, Milton Friedman to a number of events and lauded him. And people don't realize who Milton Friedman really was. Milton Friedman, in 1955, the year after Brown versus Board of Education, came out with one of his first pieces of major writing. And his thesis was how we should handle Brown v. Board of Education is to abolish public schools. And he said, in his own words, that we should have white schools, black schools, and colored schools. People could choose to go wherever they want. He rejected the idea of Brown v. Board of Education, a fundamental principle in our country, after almost 100 years of denying the equal protection of the laws that was embodied and enshrined in our 14th Amendment at the cost of the blood of hundreds of thousands of Americans who fought in the Civil War. Once the Supreme Court was finally trying to actualize those rights that had been dormant and rejected for decades, his response, well, we should just get rid of public schools and just let segregation reign. So after that salient piece in 1955, Milton and his wife Rose went to work trying to concoct different schemes to basically kill public schools. So they settled on choice. School choice was their method. Vouchers was something that they pursued, as well as charters, and the whole operation was designed to basically have, they knew that they couldn't immediately abolish public schools, but they were working on ways to try to get there, to defund, to take the bricks and mortar out of the schools. There's the exact quote: exclusively colored schools and mixed schools, exclusively white schools. Betsy DeVos, key to this operation. I submitted testimony against her to the Senate, but of course she was confirmed nevertheless. Along with others, I submitted testimony against Sessions and Pruitt and more, or evidence and the like. But Betsy also devoted herself to the Milton sort of idea of killing public schools, and has spent a lot of the money that she inherited from her own family, the Prince family, and also from the DeVos family from Amway, in advancing that agenda. And she also spent money, like the Kochs, in trying to kill public finance. So this is one of her quotes. This was said in the 1990s, that she decided to stop taking offense that they're buying influence. We conceded, we do expect something in return, and what she wants is to remake our society to fit her own personal image. And she has funded James Bopp to be one of the people who has been attacking BICRA. He was one of the key lawyers in Citizens United.
Was that her husband? Could you explain who she was?
Yeah, so her husband is Dick DeVos, and they're part of the DeVos family, and the DeVos family is in Michigan. To my hello Michigander over there. The DeVos family has, like the Kochs, embraced this sort of free market fundamentalism, and they funded basically the right-wing takeover of Michigan. They fund the sort of the local think tank there. They fund these groups that pop up from time to time and are engaged. They took credit basically for right to work in Michigan, for destroying unions in Michigan was their primary objective, and they've run for office. Dick had run for office, and they they have talked a lot about their charity. I would say to you, in my personal opinion, that it's a little bit like what's happening with some of these billionaires. You can see with Rex Sinquefield in Missouri. You can see it with the DeVosses in Michigan. Is they don't want government to provide to help people who are suffering to meet needs if they're impoverished and they need a helping hand. They want to have the private charities do that. You've seen that in the debate a lot in the last year or so. And I think they want it, personally, this is my opinion, they want that in part because then you're beholden to them. Their charity buys your loyalty to them, that you won't criticize them. They become your benefactors. It's a very baronial, sort of feudalistic system in my view. Oh yes?
Aren't there like ties to Blackwater with the DeVosses?
Yes. Yes, so the question is, are there ties to Blackwater? So Betsy DeVos's name was Betsy Prince, and her brother is Eric Prince. And Eric Prince created Blackwater, which then became XE, super hard to Google, super hard to search by Google, and then has a new iteration in his alliance with Trump in the effort to basically privatize our military operations further than they already are. There's a lot of privatization already, but use mercenaries to a greater extent in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so that's who Eric Prince is, the orchestrator of the largest mercenary operation in the United States that operates globally.
Was that under Bush? You said Trump, but wouldn't this have been during the Iraq War?
No, so now, in the recent months, Eric Prince has been actively lobbying or fraternizing or hanging out with the Trump team, including Steve Bannon, and trying to move forward this privatization agenda globally for our current obligations or potentially future obligations in terms of the continuing disaster that has engulfed the Middle East in the wake of all the military action and death and destruction there.
Didn't he also try to organize
$10 billion a year?
Yes, a lot of money.
Did
yes?
he also try to organize a back channel to the Russians in the Antilles or something?
Well, there's a lot of
Trump.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation about the back channels, and I would definitely like to talk to you about it later.
Sure.
If that's all right. Okay, so if you don't mind, let me just click through real quick, and I promise we're moving on from Alec, but there's a couple more things you should know. So making it harder for Americans to vote, making it harder for unions to organize, stopping needed benefits for workers, promoting trade laws that outsource jobs. They've supported every bad trade bill ever that passed. Limiting damages for dangerous products, blocking efforts to address climate change, one of their top agenda items. Limiting rules that protect our air and water, privatizing schools, prisons, and assets, including highways. They don't think that we should have public highways. They should be private highways with tolls that are really corporate taxes. Corporate taxes that you don't get a say on, just to be clear. Detaining more immigrants for longer. That's because CCA would be a beneficiary of that agenda. Opposing Wall Street reforms, opposing health insurance reforms, spending a huge amount of money funded by the Kochs to attack the Affordable Care Act, which is known as, by many people, as Obamacare. Stopping limits on bank fees and interest because you want to pay as much interest as possible. You wouldn't want Congress to limit how much interest you pay on loans. That's part of the Alec agenda. Opposing taxes on windfall profits for oil companies. The last thing they did before we exposed their role in Stand Your Ground was in their committee, their Public Safety and Elections Committee that they disbanded temporarily, was to pass a rule that cities couldn't bar machine guns. Because everyone is clamoring for more machine guns on the street. They oppose taxes on investment income of any kind, all kinds. Like there are some ways to protect retirement income, but they oppose any tax on investment income, and privatizing Social Security and Medicaid, and more. I'll skip forward. This was their sort of agenda for this year. It includes limiting the EPA's powers, the tax reform that's now being debated, teed up for this fall by the Kochs with Trump as part of that agenda, killing the Endangered Species Act, and more. We've documented all of this on our websites, including their effort to invoke a constitutional convention. They've also been sort of the mothership of the original preemption bills. Preemption is a way to take away the rights of cities to regulate activity within the bounds of those cities. Alec has a preemption bill on firearms regulation, on the minimum wage, and on environmental regulations, certain environmental regulations, and then they've expanded, the Alec members, not Alec, has expanded to say cities can't pass paid sick leave, living wage ordinances, raising minimum wage, have pesticide limits, GMOs, internet taxes, charter schools, gun safety, cell phones, broadband. And let me pause there because I understand that there's a city here in Colorado, Longmont, that has municipal broadband, and it has the fastest internet ever, and it's affordable. Well, Alec and the Kochs have been total opponents of municipal broadband. They're funded, Alec is funded in part by AT&T and Verizon, and Comcast has been part of the operation as well, and so they have actively tried to kill municipal broadband measures which would help all Americans save money and untether, our right to access, or our necessity in many ways of accessing the internet in this modern day from all these other fees, which are really corporate taxes imposed by corporations against us.
Is that why Boulder can't get a broadband?
Yeah, very likely, possibly the case.
Now, I'd like to address that specifically, that what's up in this election is whether or not we're going to continue to extend the tax, the utility tax, so that we can continue to get municipalization of our electricity energy supply. At the moment, it is privatized and under the monopoly of Excel. I had a program on KGNU this last Friday that you can listen to, kgnu.org/connections, in which Tom Bruniotis, who is the person in Longmont who runs both their municipal electric energy municipality and their public broadband, which is the fastest in the country at 1 gigabyte, and it's 1/10 the cost of what Comcast charges for 1/10 the performance. So it's 1/2 that, it's $50 a month. But here's the point. We can never get public broadband in Boulder if we do not pass this extension to get a municipal energy supply, because they go together. If that gets defeated, Zio Corporation, which has put all sorts of 501c4 money, dark money, into this election, will in fact get private broadband.
Yeah, so let me just say, I personally, I think that's a really important point, and I really appreciate it, and I think folks who want to hear more about it, and I hope you do because it is a really important point, should come and talk with you afterwards, and I appreciate that.
I wanted to point it out when you're talking about public broadband.
No,
somebody asked the question, is that why we don't have public broadband?
No, exactly, and it is a thing that is being fought in state after state. In Georgia, they try to crush it in a number of different cities, and they don't want it to succeed anywhere like Longmont, because then when people hear about it, they go, we want that too. So they've been really determined to try to crush it, and I do appreciate the comment. So this is just a snapshot. I'm going to flow through it in terms of the number of states that are trying to preempt different things. Colorado, because it has a divided, because it has doesn't have an Alec government, basically, doesn't have Alec control of the state legislature and the governorship, has not advanced these items. But if that were to change, some of these items could very well move forward. And the most infamous preemption bill in recent years was the Transgender Bill in North Carolina, and the Bathroom Bill, that also the Alec legislators included barring paid sick leave, raising minimum wage, and civil rights laws from being covered, along with the more infamous part of that bill. So, preemption, I wanted to talk about preemption in part because it's not just some sort of partisan issue. It actually literally takes away your power in the government that's closest to you. And you've heard over many years Republicans and Democrats talk about the importance of local government. And yet Alec and its allies, these corporations, are determined to take away your power at the government that you have the best chance of influencing, because there's less big money influence, and you have more opportunity to pick up the phone and tell your council member what you really think about something. Try to get on the phone with your congressperson directly. I can't do it. And I lobbied them, back in the day. And so it really is a real test of our democracy and federalism, which is the idea that we need to have local democracy, state power, and federal power. And of course you should be able to regulate things that are happening in your own backyard. So we've got a listing of all the Alec corporations if you want to know who they are. I'll tell you that last year we pushed out of Alec Ford Motor Company, Enterprise Rental Company, the biggest rental car company in the world, and Expedia Travel. And then we also exposed and pushed AARP out of Alec last year. Why is AARP cozying up to Alec? So we pushed them out last year, but I have sad news to tell you, which was at Alec's convention in Denver this summer. AARP lobbyists, there were dozens of them there. So if you're concerned about Alec, you ought to tell AARP and the other corporations what you think. So if you want to learn more about who the Alec corporations are, you can go to our SourceWatch site. We have them all documented. We also document all the politicians that are part of Alec. So we are the core hub for all of the documentation that state groups do across the country, including a new report by Colorado Common Cause. We've documented who the Colorado legislators are with Alec ties. There are more. These are the ones who are like known to be active in the sense of on a task force. They've been on an Alec task force where they vote with corporations. But there are others who are not on here because the Republican legislators who are the leaders of Alec are tasked with recruiting every new member in the legislature to join Alec and encouraging them to pay $50 a year to be members, while corporations pay thousands of dollars for the same sort of basic membership rights to vote as equals with the politicians. So if you want to know more about that, you can check our SourceWatch site or go to the Common Cause report in Colorado. These are the former representatives, and I would point out the very, very bottom here is Glenn Vod. He left and then has been very active in the Colorado Public Utility Commission. He's a true believer of the Alec privatization schemes. More forward.
From the commission.
He's left PUC. So anyway, Alec is not just Alec. Alec is also works with American Prosperity. AFP, not you. American Prosperity, the Koch brothers operation, has a vote at Alec meetings on these bills. These think tanks that I mentioned, they have a vote with the corporations on Alec bills and your legislators, but you don't. The State Policy Network, which is the state part, the national part, the state part, that's part of the operation. And so there's this whole axis of how this works on an integrated basis to try to move forward this corporate legislative agenda. So we've also documented the State Policy Network. State Policy Network uses these think tanks to advance this Alec agenda. And we have a whole site at our Alec Exposed, or pardon me, our Exposed by Cindy site where you can check out your state, who are the SPN members in your state. It's the Independence Institute, the Centennial Institute, and the Steamboat Institute. That means they're part of this network to advance the Alec corporate agenda. We have profiles on every single one of them, including what we know of their funding. Funding from 95 to 2015 and before, for example, with the Independence Institute. And you can check those out at any time if you're interested in their activities. And then this spring, we helped unveil and analyze a set of documents called the Bradley documents, which I mentioned when we began this conversation earlier this evening. Those documents were hacked by a foreign hacker. We don't know exactly why. A hacker who is in some ways implicated in the other hacking of the DNC and beyond targeted Bradley, although Bradley has engaged in a lot of activities in Ukraine, where Russia takes a very big interest. But right before the election, there was a hack of the Bradley Foundation documents. They were put online. We were very busy looking at other things happening in the country. So we paused, and then we started taking a closer look at those documents, and we realized that but for one document, they were authentic. They were board documents going back years, employment manuals going back years. They're not the sort of thing that someone would just spend an entire lifetime creating as a fraud. And the Bradley Foundation ultimately told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that they were in fact authentic documents. So we analyzed them, and what they revealed was how the Bradley Foundation was working to basically change not just Wisconsin, my home state now, but also Colorado and other states. And they were spending millions. They're spending millions in Colorado to do this, to advance this agenda. The Bradley Foundation has nearly $1 billion worth of assets, about $800 million. And they have had a recent surge that has brought them to that level, which has allowed them to make the type of investments that I'm going to talk with you about briefly. The Bradley Foundation has some huge billionaires on its board, including Art Pope from the dollar store financial fortune, the billionaire who has, in my view, wrecked North Carolina, has basically undermined core components of democracy in that state, and put forward a legislation that has attempted to privatize water and more. He's on the board He's also on the board of the Koch brothers Americans for Prosperity operation and other activities, and is a sort of frequent flyer in this agenda. But also Diane Hendrix, who's a billionaire from Wisconsin, who made her fortune in the ABC building supply company. She's the one who has been pushing right to work. They want to make Colorado a right to work state, push forward more restrictions on unions in the state. She's on the Bradley board. And then there's another person named Cleta Mitchell, who's a lawyer who has been one of the lawyers who's done the operational documents for many of these, in my view, shadowy 501c3 and C4 operations, and others. The blueprint talks about how they're going to fund, this is the Wisconsin example, think tanks in the state, conservative media in the state, opposition research, which is really targeted on politicians, bill writing groups, namely Alec, candidate recruitment through a 501c3 that is called American Majority, not just in Wisconsin but nationally, advocacy groups like school choice, and legal centers to basically challenge disclosure or campaign finance laws and more. They rated all the states in the country on a five-point scale for each item, and the top score was 40, and Wisconsin got a top score because they've basically taken over. See, that's my alarm telling me that I've got 30 minutes, so I got to wrap up soon so you can ask questions. Anyway, so Wisconsin was the model of how they have implemented their agenda to basically take over a state and turn a blue state red, or a purpley state red. And they issued all these documents, and they had a big video on keeping our lakes blue and our state red, and more. And then they rated the states. So they looked at every state in the country, how much infrastructure was there to help them advance their agenda, where could they invest more. They chose 5 states: Wisconsin, North Carolina, our Pope's home state, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. You are in their bullseye. They rated Colorado. They said Colorado's great with the think tanks, the 3 I told you about. They said they do not have sufficient receptive policymakers, meaning they don't control your legislature yet. Opposition research, they feel like they've got that covered. They've got trackers on the ground who can attack Democrats or progressives whenever they see fit. Legal component, meaning they've got some lawyers who are going to litigate and defend their operations and litigate against any new campaign finance or ethics rules people want to impose. They've got so-called investigative journalism, which they describe as, one of them is, I think, Complete Colorado, which is the so-called news entity of the Independence Institute. They say they've got dynamic leadership, meaning they've got people who are actively paid to be organizing in the state. They've got grassroots groups because Americans for Prosperity is active here in the state, which is the Koch group. And they've got local funding, meaning it's not just their money, they're also blending with billionaires here in the state. So they ranked Colorado with a score of 36 to 40, and they want to make you a 40. Some of this is really about this whole contest we're in nationally, globally, in our country, in a sense, about red state control and blue cities, where you have cities that are more progressively inclined, that are surrounded by more rural areas that have tended to be more conservative. And these battles play out in our state legislatures, where depending on how districting happens, and districting is a big issue in Colorado in terms of trying to have fairer district lines, but also looking toward 2020 and the congressional elections that year and the redistricting that will happen after the US Census. But there's an effort to basically minimize the impact, the power of cities on state policy. And you could see it, I think, last year in Proposition or Amendment 71, the one that changed the rules that you have to have a certain percentage of every proposition in every county in order to basically evade the power of a majority in the state, having a chance to vote on things that the majority of the people might want. That's part and parcel of that broader agenda. What we're seeing with this agenda where it happens, for example, in Wisconsin, where I'm from, is that these candidates are being outspent by the outside groups. This is just a small example in Wisconsin until they destroyed the public finance laws in the state and basically said that judicial candidates weren't going to be under public finance elections anymore. They had, in our most recent election, they had, the candidates were publicly financed, but they were vastly outspent by the outside groups that didn't disclose who was giving them money. Then you have your judiciary basically ruling on these measures that are extreme measures, advancing the Koch agenda, the Alec agenda, and more, and they're put in place in Wisconsin, I can tell you most definitely, that a majority of the justices who ruled that Scott Walker's very controversial Act 10 legislation, they ruled it to be constitutional in the Wisconsin state constitution, a majority of them were Republicans, and all of them had been put in office in part by the same outside money groups that were under investigation under our criminal laws for potential violations of campaign finance laws that then that same Supreme Court kicked out, stopped the criminal investigation into violations of our campaign finance laws there. And we actually submitted a brief to the US Supreme Court asking for that case to be returned because those justices should have recused because they were basically put in office due to the same dark money forces that were being investigated, and they didn't recuse. Wisconsin is sort of a canary in the coal mine for what could, and I know coal mine was Colorado, et cetera, but it's the canary in the coal mine for what could be coming your way. But it's not just that. The Koch brothers have their eyes on limiting disclosure requirements, lowering and eliminating contribution limits, trying to protect against you limiting coordination between these different groups, and eliminating public financing of elections. This right-wing infrastructure through Alec is also working to continue to advance voter ID laws to make it harder for people to vote. And beyond Alec, think groups like True the Vote out of Texas, which is a sort of Tea Party affiliated group, they're working to basically, they and others are working to claim fraud in elections, as you've seen with Chris Kobach and more, trying in state after state after state to make it harder to do early voting, mail-in voting, same-day voter registration, purging people who didn't vote in the last election, even if it was a midterm that many people don't vote in. So they basically send you a little card saying you didn't vote. If you don't re-register, we're gonna throw you out. They did this in Indiana last year. Alec has been a vehicle, as well as these Koch operations, for spreading myths and lies about voter fraud. They're after ethics bills, ethics commissioners, rules on coordination. They are trying to go against any anti-corruption legislation and more, saying this is all about free speech. So we're back where we started with Justice Powell. But it's worse. And this, I really will end on the worst part. No, it's worse because most of our regulatory scheme is built around, our regulatory system is built around mass media. And I actually gave this presentation before the revelations about Facebook, but we're now in a micro-targeting era where if you're not the target of the campaign ad, you don't even know that it's happening. Cambridge Analytica, which is Robert Mercer, the billionaire Robert Mercer and Rebecca Mercer's firm working with Steve Bannon, they were targeting people, for example, Cubans who liked a certain type of music or food or what have you in Florida against Hillary. And only the people who met that demographic criteria received the ads attacking Hillary. So if you're an ordinary journalist, you don't even see those ads. You can't debunk them, you can't tell people they're wrong. The only people who see the ads are Facebook, which isn't telling you, and the people who place the ads, and the people who are the targets of the ads. And so it's very hard for us, and you're going to see that in this, probably in this coming governor's race next year, and beyond, an effort to really push advertising at a much less cost through social media in ways that you can't see and can't easily regulate. So what do we do with all this dark money? I'm going to end on a positive note. I tried it on a positive note. The reason I got the Alec bills was because a small group of protesters, there were probably 24, came out to an Alec meeting in April of 2011 to say that it was wrong for Alec to have this influence on our democracy. And out of that small protest of about 24 people, someone inside Alec got a conscience and leaked those bills. Since then, we've had many marches, including one at the state capitol here in July, about Alec, to try to educate people about Alec. We, meaning we the people, not we, CMD. And together with the work that my organization has done and our allies, we've pushed more than 100 corporations out of Alec. Yay! Yay. Some of the biggest corporations in our country we've pushed out of Alec because they've been denying climate change and up to all sorts of no good. But obviously the problem is bigger than what we're talking about in this room and beyond, and so I can only offer you, before we go to Q&A, a little bit of solace in Reverend Martin Luther King's Nobel Prize speech, which has given me solace about having strategic patience to basically restore and protect our democracy from the assault that it's under. And I'm just going to quote briefly from it, which is, "Thousands of faceless, anonymous, relentless young people, black and white, whose courageous acts We're a refreshing oasis in the heat of injustice, and for the ennobling power of nonviolence to awaken the conscience of the great decent majority who through blindness, fear, pride, and irrationality have allowed their consciousness to sleep. Now I would say to you, we have a great decent majority who are awakened in many ways, but don't know a lot of the stuff that's happening, but are very concerned. And so I'm hopeful that we, in this era of, I would say from Charles Dickens, from A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, but we have more people who are waking up to the necessity of standing up and protecting our democracy than ever before, and from more diverse backgrounds and different ages and social strata, who are coming together to say, we want our country to do better. We want our great country not just to be like Make America Great, but to be actually a place where our representatives represent us and do the sort of bills to make our laws better, to make it stronger for our families and for our future, for our environment, for our kids, for our grandkids. And so I'm hopeful, despite all the pessimism I've shared with you today. So that's my presentation. We have 20 minutes for questions. I'm really sorry. I was aiming for 30. Is that okay? All right. Yes?
What can we as everyday citizens do to fight against the octopus and Alec and the slime and the Republicans?
Well, on a nonpartisan basis, I would say to you that I think there's a lot of things people can do, and some of it is just conversations, really, because so many people, first of all, I was really busy, and I really am grateful for you coming out on a Monday night, the beginning of a work week for many people, and for others, many other chores and tasks that need to get done on a daily basis. People are really busy, and this can be very overwhelming. It can feel sort of hopeless. And I hear from a lot of people like, it doesn't matter if I vote. Well, it does matter, because if you don't vote, people who have a different perspective may very well vote, and may vote in ways that hurt you, hurt your families. And so I think that one of the things is just having these conversations. Another thing is obviously be involved in local community groups that are taking action on democracy, like League of Women Voters and more. I think we have to basically be demanding that our system defend against this corruption. We can't accomplish this year, obviously, in terms of what's happened with Citizens United in this Congress, but we can be moving forward in demanding and calling our legislators and telling them what we think. Now, some legislators have been evading hearing that by having telephone town halls because they're afraid of the people who they're supposed to represent.
Cardboard glory?
Yes, I won't say yes on a nonpartisan basis, but certainly there are members who have been avoiding their constituents. And we actually have been documenting how many of those members, we've done a series with The Intercept online at theintercept.com, where we have basically documented how while they weren't visiting you, they were sure as heck visiting their huge corporate donors. So they didn't have time to come to your town hall, but boy, were they happy to go have steak and wine with their big corporate donors in the PACs and the trade groups. So, yeah. So there's more to be done. Yes?
Wondering if revoking corporate charters would help us out in this regard in some of this dirty politics?
So the question is whether revoking corporate charters would help. I have to say, one of my learning moments in the past 8 years was learning about the history of corporations in our country. I had actually taken business law in college before law school, but they didn't teach you about that part, right? They taught you about incorporating and limited liability and more. They didn't actually teach you the origin of corporations, and it was really a surprise to me, and it might be a surprise to some of you, but not all of you, to know that corporations are a really modern invention. In fact, I think we had an American Revolution in part about one of the very first corporations that was working hand in glove with the British Crown. But corporations used to be, when they were first created, they were more closely regulated. They had charters, and the charters were of limited duration, and corporations would have to come back and get recertified. Because they are a creature of statute, they were something that we could regulate through statute. And I would say we certainly need to better regulate corporations through statute. I think it would be a difficult measure to pass, in this climate where these corporations have so much influence. But I think it's definitely worth having that conversation. Why should we let these corporations have so much power? Corporations don't have a right to vote in our democracy because the democracy is supposed to be other people, by the people, for the people. Why should they have such outsized influence on our democracy when the effect of that is to basically nullify our voting? So I think that those are important conversations to be having because most people don't know that history. And I think many people would support some sort of fair and reasonable regulation of corporations. Yes?
Are there Russians here? I don't remember hearing you talk about the Russians. I mean,
Russians here where?
In all of this, we've been hearing how the Russians are involved with Trump, and it's just, I never heard of it. Are there?
Well, now I have to confess that I'm Russian. No, I am. My family fled not one but two communist revolutions. We fled Russia to China, didn't know it was going to fall, and then my grandmother fled China to the United States. And so far, so good. But lately, I don't know, right? In this particular, these gray money groups, we haven't seen it, but we have seen, and Bob Sloan, who's a tremendous researcher who created a group called Voter Legislative Transparency Project, VLTP, which you can check out online, VLTP.org, has helped document Alec's role in exporting the Koch agenda abroad, and how they were trying to move this agenda in Eastern Europe in particular, and the new Soviet states, the former CIS, and how they were basically trying to take the opportunity of the fall of the Soviet Union to advance the Koch agenda more broadly. And the Kochs have funded other operations to help that. And in fact, the tremendous book by Nancy McLean, who many of you may have read, Democracy in Chains, is in part about the effort of the Koch brothers, one of the big academics, but real activists involved with the Koch brothers at George Mason University, basically tried to use the Koch blueprint in South America and the havoc it has wreaked on countries that have adopted their restrictions in terms of the ability of succeeding generations, meaning elected representatives by those people, to undo the damage done by the Koch agenda being embedded into their constitution. Yes?
Is your organization or the members of your organization ever facing lawsuit by Alec over Alec's members?
We have not, although we prepared for them to sue us in case they did. I felt like we were on very solid legal ground to launch Alec Exposed, and I've been threatened in essence, or I should say more clearly, I've been smeared by the Koch brothers. They actually on their Koch End site, they call me a liar. They should just sue me, and I would defend it with the truth at every possible turn. But basically, during the aftermath of the Trayvon Martin killing, MSNBC was covering the issue, and the Koch brothers were very upset that the Kochs were being talked about as funding Alec, which had advanced the Stand Your Ground agenda, and they kept saying we don't fund the gun laws. We didn't support those. So I wrote a big research piece showing how since 1993 they have basically been funding Alec as it has backed every single terrible gun measure that has been pushed in the last 20 years, including the measures to make it harder to have local firearms regulations. In the aftermath of the shooting at Virginia Tech, to say that we need more guns on campus, efforts to, as I said, to say that cities shouldn't regulate machine guns. The Koch Industries has been on the board of directors for Alec for more than 20 years. They even led the board of Alec. They're responsible for the activities of Alec, and that includes the extreme gun agenda that Alec put forward. So they said that so what happened was MSNBC apparently offered to have the Koch lawyer debate me, and of course they were terrified. I'll tell you that's my opinion. They were terrified to debate me because the facts are my defense. The truth is my sword and shield, and so they refused that, and in the process of refusing that, they published this piece on their site saying that they wouldn't debate me because I'm a liar. So I thought about suing them for libel because that's really outrageous, because we can document every single bill that passed under their watch. But we certainly are in their sites, and they don't like us, and I'm sure they'd love to sue us if they wanted to, if they felt like they could do it.
That means you're doing something right.
Something like that. Yes?
Yeah, how can we not be paranoid about everything now?
I would say, and the question is, how can we not be paranoid about everything now? I would say, just to share a private story, a couple of years ago I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was overcome with fear for my life and losing my life, and I was really worried, as you would be. And then I realized worry never made anything better. Never made anything better. It only made it worse. Like, I only felt worse when I worried. I didn't feel happier. I didn't feel stronger. I just felt worse. And so I wrote to myself a note that I read every day, which is, worry never changed anything for the better. You just can't worry. You have to take action. And we have to take action. We have to live with joy in our lives. And we have to find space to take care of ourselves in the midst of this tremendous struggle that we're in. You know, when we think about this circumstance, you know, the odds are stacked against us, but the odds have been stacked against people before. Women, you know, fought for the right to vote for more than 100 years in this country. There were even Supreme Court decisions saying that women couldn't possibly be lawyers. They were so wrong. But you know, a 100-year fight. I'm hoping this is not a 100-year fight. I don't want to depress you further. The civil rights movement was fought against, you know, enormous odds of a majority against recognizing and fulfilling the promise of the 14th Amendment, and tremendous violence, including murder. People have faced tremendous odds in advancing social justice. But as I said, as I wanted to say, these are moral issues. It's a moral issue of whether we're a democracy, and as a democracy, we have a right to vote and have our voices heard, and not have our voices drowned out by big money, by foreign corporations, global corporations, or even domestic corporations. When you have a moral issue, not just some bill, if you lose, you don't just go, oh, I give up. If you lose, you redouble your efforts. I've got to talk to 3 more people this year or this month. I've got to, do something different this way. And unlike our predecessors in these great social movements of our time, we have the internet to help us. Now it can be an impediment in many ways to organizing, but it can be a help in lots of ways to inspiring us. And so I'm really hopeful that, notwithstanding the challenges we face, that there really are people of goodwill in this country who will come together to say, not our democracy. We want to have a democracy that works for us. Yes?
Are there many people on the good guys' side with lots of money and lots of marketing expertise and lots of psychology expertise that can attempt to reach Americans in a similar way that those groups do? I mean, I don't feel like there is.
It's sort of hard to answer the question in the sense that I have a perspective on this, which is that part of the reason why the Cooks have to spend so much money on this is because it takes a lot of money to convince people of a lie. To convince people that the supply side economics works, that if you just do tax cuts for the richest, they're just going to benevolently spend it on other things in our communities. No, but it's taken Charles more than almost 40 years to plant these seeds and to water them with it, fertilize it with lots and lots of cash. You know, in the progressive world, I would say there's certainly funders who are trying to counter the Kochs or counter this influence. I think one of the challenges, and it certainly manifests in this, I don't want to call it the Trump era, but in this period of time, is that so many rights are under assault, under attack, being undermined. So many people are at risk and I saw this, before this administration. I certainly saw it during the first Bush administration, where they would just throw everything at the wall, and you couldn't stop everything, and then some of them would get through, like John Roberts. So it's daunting. That's a tactic. It's a tactic to just come at you on all fronts and then try to exhaust you and make you feel hopeless, and you can't fight every fight, and some things go through. So it's hard. I think it's hard for progressives in some ways because there are so many specific issue areas that people have a niche interest in, and they're all under assault. But the reality is that we're stronger together. Progressives, and I would identify myself as a progressive. We're stronger together if we also support each other's battles. Then we can have greater strength in numbers by supporting each other. But there's not like some sort of unified theory of physics that has been devised to counter them.
And they've got these tactics, and they work. I mean, fight fire with fire,
Lisa?
Yes?
You threw a lot of resources at us in the first 10 minutes, and I'm typing fast.
But I speak faster.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So the point is, if people are overwhelmed, can you name the top 3 to 5 resources that we should use? Put those URLs up. Maybe you can put up that axis, and any of you with mobile phones, you can take a picture of the screen and have that great diagram that was up. But things like the Emmy that Ava DuVernay, maybe we can have public screenings of things that expose these tactics. It was the one before that.
Oh, it was? Okay.
It says Axis something or other.
Oh, yeah, the axis of Alec.
There you go. Thank you. So, top three resources or 5.
Yeah, so I would say I think it's a great idea, and I think that I will work with League of Women Voters to share a version of this PowerPoint presentation with resources. And I obviously am biased in this particular way, which is I hope you'll go to our site, which is Exposed by CMD, and our related sites, PR Watch or Source Watch, Alec Exposed, because we really have worked really hard to try to document these things, so you don't have to start from scratch. But we can't cover everything. I'm only one person, and my team is small, and so there are things we're going to miss. And so you might know, for example, a Colorado legislator that is part of Alec. You can call your legislator and ask them if they're part of Alec, and if they're not on our list, let me know, or sign up on SourceWatch to change that and add their name to the list. Or if you find a corporation in Colorado has been funding Alec because of their convention here, let us know, and we can help share that information more broadly and more. And so I know that the League of Women Voters for Colorado is going to post the PowerPoint, or a version of this PowerPoint, a streamlined version of it, and perhaps the Boulder County would do.
Yeah, do that too.
Yes, sir?
Are they reaching down to races at the municipal level or the school board level and so forth?
The Koch brothers certainly have been investing, in particular, in school board races here in Colorado and Douglas County specifically. But I know that there have been some of these similarly aligned groups, for example, trying to affect the Jefferson County schools and more. And for the Kochs have been active in the Wisconsin school board races as well. DeVos and company have been active, and so the school boards are a particular concern in the sense that in Colorado, I understand from some of the research that has been done that the traditional rules for limits and disclosure that may apply for Colorado statewide candidates or state legislative candidates don't necessarily apply to the school boards, which creates this sort of almost like Wild West sort of environment potentially for some of this spending. And yet the school board voters can't apparently change the rules for that school board for those elections themselves. It has to be authorized by the state. It would require some sort of state measure to fix that. So maybe that's something that that you all in the league can look into, or will be looking into, as I understand it, to see if there are ways to get better transparency, more disclosure in those races as well. But I would say not just of the candidates, the real challenge is this outside money, who's spending it and who's really gaining from it. The woman in the back?
Yeah, briefly, here in Boulder, we have sort of I call it a back-off, but again, Zato, Dan Russo, they've set up these groups called Open Boulder and Better Boulder. They're kind of front groups for corporate control of our internet, so we don't go down the long mountain path. So under the rubric of Engage, Open Boulder, Better Boulder, there's a lot of good people in there because they don't know actually what they're being used for. Right? And so Dan Russo is one of the key, he's a millionaire on the Milltown side, and he's frankly decided to buy Boulder. So quite a few people he intends to buy Boulder. So, the KTMU shows are a good way to keep track of that. Be careful.
Thank you.
And we don't know who's behind Better Boulder or Open Boulder. They've never disclosed that, and they slip through disclosure laws exactly like you're talking about by avoiding creating an issue campaign even, which is required under our local law to be registered and have disclosure, but they're able to do it just by endorsing candidates without necessarily actually registering for them.
And I think in Colorado, one of the things that that I've heard is that under Colorado law, and I don't practice law in Colorado, so you should definitely talk with a Colorado lawyer, but my understanding from the conversation on Friday is that citizens can help enforce the election laws in the state. And so there may be some avenues there, that are worth considering. And I think You two might have the last questions because we're at 2 minutes to 8 and we promised to wrap at 8 formally. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So, ma'am, miss?
Did you find the fingerprints of dark money in the LA school board takeover by charter school advocates?
Yes, there definitely was dark money being spent out in Los Angeles, and actually, I don't know if many people know what happened there, but there was a takeover. There was, in fact, a takeover of the Los Angeles Unified School District, LAUSD.
The second largest in the nation.
Yes, the second largest in the nation, and it was taken over by charter advocates. And just this past week, I think the president of the school board was indicted. Multiple felonies for campaign finance violations. So we'll see what happens there. But a couple of years ago, Rupert Murdoch said that education is like a $1 trillion business in the United States, and they wanted a piece of the pie. So corporations have been actively trying to defund education, public education, push money into charters and vouchers. K-12 schools, I don't know if you have them out here, but K-12 has been active in Wisconsin, Arizona, other states. We've tracked them. We called them the highest paid public school teacher in the country. They pay their CEO and others millions of dollars plus stock options, and 90% of their revenue comes from tax dollars. The kids are in the virtual schools. Their testing is terrible because kids have a hard time concentrating for hours on end with an internet. On the internet, you actually need schools, and it's not just that you need schools. You need the social education of schools. And I would say to you, I feel like I was blessed to grow up in Colorado when public schools were really well funded and have the chance to have orchestra and arts and sports and everything, and that's the type of education I think our children need and the type of things that I think together we can stand for better schools for our kids and a better society. So I've been cut off. Here we go. Come on.
We want to thank Lisa for coming, and we have a small gift for a token of appreciation. We appreciate her. She actually came in for a state league presentation on Saturday and then agreed to work with us on Monday night. So, and she does have family, so that was nice. Also, let's see, we had a few flyers on upcoming events, and you can always check our website. And thank you for coming. And